Good morning everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. My little blurb again, we're a few days into after our 6-week grocery shop, and generally speaking I try and do a daily sort of a video showing you how we manage to use our food in a manner that makes sure it gets used and lasts the full 6 weeks for our family of 8 off-grid. Today I had a bunch of stuff to do, so I didn't spend a lot of time in the kitchen, but we used up some of the chicken. So I buy a whole bunch of trays of chicken, and then it has to be used within its best before dates. So it gets cooked off and either frozen in meals, frozen for eating, or used over the first part of the day. So today was chicken. We did... what did we do? Flatbreads, sourdough flatbreads with chicken, and we did a chicken noodle stir fry. So I've shared those today, and that was pretty much all I did in the kitchen today. I had other stuff that I had to get done, so they are there for you to have a look at. I also realized once I was editing the video that Kavik had drawn on my arm with texter. He was showing me how he was drawing letters of the alphabet, so please excuse the texter that is up my arm as I'm doing it all. I didn't realize it at the time, otherwise I would have tried to wipe it off, but that's, kids, so homeschooled and kids, so that's fine. Anyway, enjoy the video. I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks guys. Chicken thighs are something we buy each month. Sometimes we buy the skin on bone-in ones that are frozen. Sometimes we buy the trays from Costco. This month they didn't have any of the frozen ones, so I bought the Costco ones, and they are $9.99 a kilo, and I tend to buy about 4 trays, which are about 2.5 kilos each, for each 6-week period sort of thing. We use them in a lot of different ways, but what we tend to do is cut them up and cook them and then store them. It seems to be the most convenient way for us to use them proportionately and make sure nothing goes to waste. So over the span of the first week, we tend to use them in the first few days how we need to, and then once it gets to the right date, we just cook the rest of them up. So once they're cooked, we then vacuum seal them into bags, and they can be used for pasta dishes or for on sourdough flatbreads, or on just in a lot of different ways. So today I was just doing one of the packs because it's still fairly early on in the dates for them. We tend to marinate them whenever we use them, so this particular one is my standard sort of a marinade. I use some smoked paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, some salt, some pepper, and the cowboy candy. I find that that's a good sort of a mix. Sometimes I might use some lemon juice or some oil if I feel like it needs it. Depends on what I'm doing with it, but we always marinate it with this sort of a combo. I do sometimes do like a soy ginger garlic type one, things like that, but generally speaking we just use this because it works well for whatever dish we want to use. And cook it off in the cast iron. Nice high heat. You want to caramelize that sugars in the cowboy candy. You do have to be careful. The fumes can sometimes be a little bit much if the pan is just that little bit too hot, but we do like to cook it off in the cast iron like that in batches, and ready to go for whatever we're going to use it for. Today we started the day off, well, it's lunchtime, but for us it's Darryl and my first meal. We did sourdough flatbreads, so it's the dough that I had made the day before and left out overnight to ferment, and then the next day we make it. I do enough for the kids and us, so this is kids' lunch, our sort of breakfast type thing. I always weigh my flatbread out. It's another pedanticness of mine. It works for portion control and things like that. So I do 60 to 70 gram portions of the flatbread and roll them into balls and put them aside ready to go, and once I've got the amount of balls that I need, then I put the rest of the dough in the fridge, and it's usable for the next few days, as long as it stays in the fridge before you want to use it. Whilst I'm doing all this, I'm cooking off the chicken, so that's the way I like to do it, is that I just cook it off in batches. If you put too much chicken in a pan at one time, it'll stew rather than fry, release liquids, and then it'll sort of stew and ends up a little bit tougher. So I like to do it in smaller batches so that you've got plenty of surface area, so it has that caramelization and things like that. So I just remove when it's cooked, add the next batch. And then I started rolling out the dough. So we just do rough circles of the sourdough. It doesn't need to be perfect. We do them fairly small because you're eating them a little bit like a soft taco rather than a wrap, because I make tortillas for wraps, not the flatbreads. The flatbreads are a thicker sort of a consistency than a tortilla. Always good to roll from the center and out and rotate, center and out and rotate. That gives you a little bit more even coverage. We tend to cook them in hot cast iron, so tend to heat up the cast iron nice and warm. I use a little bit of lard in the bottom, but you can do it dry. It changes I think I've discussed it before, that it changes the texture of them. So if you do it on a dry pan, it's more likely to be a soft sort of a tortilla. Well, if you're making tortillas, you do them in a dry pan, so similar sort of a concept. It's going to be a softer crust to the dough. Whereas if you add a little bit of lard or fat to the pan, you're going to get some crispy bits. So you're going to get those brown cooked crispy bits. Some bits are a little bit more cooked than others, and it has a bit more of a crunch and texture to it. So we tend to like to add a little bit of lard for the flatbreads, because as I said, they're sort of like a soft taco, but the bit of crunch to it's really nice. If I'm making tortillas, I tend to do them dry. But I tend to make tortillas with lard. Not in a sourdough, so the dough itself is quite high fat anyway. Flip them once or twice, whatever you need to do, and again, it depends on how you want to eat them, whether you want them crispy or soft, adding that fat or cooking them for a certain length of time, or however you want to make it work. So that was lunch for us, breakfast for us, lunch for the kids, but I didn't get a photo of it, so I don't have anything to share of the finished dish there. Sorry about that, but that's what we had. We had it with some homemade mayo. There was some sauerkraut put on, some tomatoes, lettuce, whatever we had around to use with it. So the other thing we did with the chicken was made dinner later on that night with it. So I made a stir fry. So I got cabbages in the hamper, as well as I bought cabbage from the fruit and veg store. We also had a cauliflower in the hamper that wasn't looking fantastic, so it needed to be used fairly quickly. We also got carrots in the hamper, and I'd also bought carrots. So we had carrots to use, and I'd bought a bag of broccoli, I don't know why I said it that way, broccoli from Costco as well. So we had a whole bunch of these fresh veggies, and we always try and use the fresh veggies in a way that makes the most of them at the beginning of the month, because the rest of the time we eat frozen vegetables and they're not as nice in things like stir fries and that. It's always nicer to have the fresh veggies, and whilst I don't have anything going on in the garden at the moment, the only time we get the really fresh veggies is right at the beginning of the month. So we always try and make the meals that complement the fresh veggies as much as possible. So I shredded all the veggies up into fairly small pieces. The kids like everything pretty fine. I probably could have used more veggies in the end, but I did a great big bowl of them, and as with things like stir fry, you make all these veggies and you think it's going to go really far, and then when you cook it up you realize that, hey, it wasn't that much after all. We use a stir fry sauce from Recipe Tin Eats, the website Recipe Tin Eats. It's a sort of her master stir fry sauce. So I always mix it up in a mason jar, and you can store it in the fridge or use it all at once, depends on how much you're making, I suppose. But it has about a half a cup of soy sauce, a half a cup of oyster sauce, a quarter of a cup of Chinese wine, a quarter of a cup of cornstarch, a tablespoon of sugar, 2 tablespoons of sesame oil, and a teaspoon of pepper in it, and then you just shake it up. Now, if I don't get around to making something like this, sweet soy sauce, and oyster sauce is my go-to, and I just drizzle it over what I'm making. But if I go to the effort of making the stir-fry sauce, it is very nice, and it is usable on lots of things. So, like, just stir-fried green veggies are really nice with it on there, a bit like when you get Chinese broccoli with oyster sauce at a Asian restaurant, at a yum cha or whatever. It's got a similar sort of a flavour to that as that. So it's worth going to the effort of making it if you've got a way to use it. We just do our stir fries in the cast iron on the gas burner. I don't own a wok. It's something that I might get at some point, but for the moment we just have the big cast iron pans, and they work. Not as well as a wok would, but they work okay. You always cook off in order of the cooking time, because obviously the things that you put in the pan first are the things that are going to be in there the longest. So you want the stuff that takes the longest to cook in there first. So I always start with my meat. So I didn't cook all the chicken off when I was cooking it earlier. I just put some in the fridge in the marinade, and so I pulled it out to cook it now. Sometimes I will do that if it's still got plenty of time left on the use by date. So it worked for today. So I cooked the chicken off first because that's going to be the thing that you need to make sure is cooked and it's going to take the longest to cook. And once the chicken is cooked, I add all the vegetables. So if you were going to be using a leafy green, some sort of a kale, a spinach, a bok choy, silver beet, anything like that, you wouldn't add it straight away because you want to add that towards the end because it's going to cook off too quickly. So you want to be adding your hard vegetables now, your carrots, your broccoli, your cabbage, your cauliflower, all that sort of stuff. You can mix up the order if you like some of it softer than others, but I'm pretty happy with most of this to be cooked off at much the same rate. So I just threw all the vegetables in there. I use tongs and just move it around. To be honest, it's not the most effective method, but it works. It keeps stuff from burning on the bottom and it's okay. I have the wooden turners and stuff, which would be perfect if there was less in the pan, but with the quantity that's in the pan, I kind of have to use the tongs. I just don't have much choice. Once we use the Aldi noodles, so they have Singapore noodles and Hokkien noodles that you can buy at Aldi. They're about $3 a packet. Not overly cheap, but I really like the consistency of them. I have tried the ones from Costco and I do not like them. I can make my own stir-fry noodles, and I have done on the channel before, but especially at the beginning of the month, there's just too much going on for me to want to do that. So we just buy 2 meals worth of these from Aldi and have them early on, and if I want stir-fry noodles later on in the month, then I will make them from scratch. But early on, I tend to use these board ones. I just put them in a bowl and then pour boiling kettle water over the top of them to heat them through and to break them up and lose a little bit of the oil on them. I find that works perfectly well. They can be eaten straight out of the packet, so it's not like you have to cook them, but I like to start off that way so that they're all separated before I add them to the pan. Again, if you had less in your pan, it probably wouldn't be such a big deal, but because my pan's so full, I'm not going to be able to move these around a whole lot, so I need to have them loose before I stick them in the pan. When you're in the pan, then you add your sauce. So I think the recipe states it might have been 3 tablespoons per 2 people of the sauce to 6 tablespoons of water. I'm not sure. I'll try and remember to link the recipe down below, but it was the Recipe Tin Eats stir-fry sauce. But I don't measure it. I just pour it and taste it. So I poured some sauce in, and then I use the starchy, oily water from the noodles as the water portion of it, because that's going to help with the texture of the sauce, as well as add some oil back into the stir fry, but also because I've got it there, so I'm not going to go and get fresh water from elsewhere when I've already got hot water sitting there that can be used. So I just put that in and I use the tongs and I turn it all around and make sure that all the noodles are shiny and covered in the sauce, and I taste it and add a bit more sauce if I need to, and that sort of thing. And then we just serve it up. So I tend to just put the cast iron pan on the table in the middle on a board, and the kids all serve themselves. I reckon I could probably do with almost twice the amount of veggies now. I think it's another one of those things that's showing the age of the kids increasing, the quantity of food that they consume, and how my groceries aren't stretching quite as far because we're spending that little bit less and not having the extra. I think that they very much could have done with sort of twice the amount of veggies to stretch this. We ended up serving them fruit and stuff for afters, I think, because it just wasn't quite enough to go all that way. And I had plenty of cabbage there that I could have used. I just didn't realise that it wasn't going to stretch as far as it used to. So that's what we did today. We used up one of the trays of chicken, sourdough flatbreads, and the stir fry. There was still some chicken left as well. I try and get up to 4 meals out of one tray of chicken, so they're about 2.5 kilos, so I try and get 4-ish meals out of each one for us as a family. So 600 odd grams of meat per meal. So we use it over a couple of days, generally speaking, and we stretch it as far as we can. So anyway, that was today's. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope you got some tips there that help out, and I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks, guys.